Hello there, my little chickadees. Once again you have found yourselves locked in the closet of terror. For it is Lurkers in the lobby, and the madness overtakes you inch by torturous. And it overtakes you with the names. Hello, good morning, good evening, good night, dear listeners. Once again, you found yourselves listening to an Oral House show. As always, it is me, Gruffy, your host and friend. And today, I am not alone. Oh no, I have two men. The first is the most Newcastleian of Newcastlers.
How do? It's me, it's Andy.
Hey man, I've just had DJ shoot me in the eyes with a cowboy gun.
I was just going to say I definitely had those sort of almost like acid flashbacks to Biker Grove then.
Oh yeah, yep. I've been to Biker Grove. It's a place. Oh, it actually exists. Oh yeah. Oh, Biker is a place, and I'm sure there's enough probes there.
Oh, what's Jeff gonna say? Have you been to biking? You didn't say hello. Tell me, Andy, were you sitting on the dock of the bay?
It's not the same. It should be Stu saying all this.
Oh, were you watching the tide roll and sway?
I was watching
You know what? The tone of this podcast changed very quick.
Newcastle, it's serious.
Oh, well, you're going to talk about Lovecraft. We have to get through Newcastle first.
Got to get to Lovecraft via Newcastle. That would be a fantastic basis for
Oh no, man.
short story.
He's gonna run the foodie on us. Well, look at these Cyclopean towers.
It reminds me of a thing a friend of mine said, which is you never get Brummy vampires in. You know, they all if they're English vampires, then they're all from London, aren't they? They're all sort of Cockney or they're Victorian. You never get Brummy vampires. You never get sort of gonna bite you now.
I'm going to bite you now. Hello, I'm the vampire lord from Dudlage.
Why the idea of a Scouser vampire as well? I think that would tickle me in the right way.
Oh, it just sounds like a velociraptor giving birth. Apologies to all Scouts listeners. I don't believe you all sound like...
How many demographics are we going to offend?
Not enough.
I try to hit all of them all. No, there's one I try not to hit. I want to know who the guy in North Korea who downloads every show we do is. I've been saying this for 6 goddamn years. I want to know who it is. I want him to get in contact. I want to know how he's doing it.
Well, I mean, not to possibly put this guy in jeopardy, but wouldn't like downloading this podcast be a seditious act?
Yes.
Yeah.
So why us?
Because you're worth it, I guess. I don't know.
I like the idea he's trying to learn English. It's just good.
This. Oh wow.
Yeah.
He's just turned up at some point, just using this myriad of bad accents and just, why man?
Oh, that's a lovely thought.
Does sound like a velociraptor giving birth.
Or something. Great. But the other voice you hear is my other guest this evening. It is the nicest smelling man in the fandom. It's...
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
It's George. So, Jesus.
I was just I wanted to bring it back. I wanted to bring the tone back, so I thought a malevolent laugh.
Oh, okay.
That's appropriate, yeah.
Well, then we'll go straight down to the... Yes, we have this evening the exaggerated elegy himself.
Oh, you got it right. Well done.
The Lord of the Silver Throne. The writer of the Books of the Strange Playgrounds. It is George. Say hello to the feeble listeners, George.
Now, you see, I feel honor bound to follow that up, to make it as sinister as I possibly can, but I don't think I can. I'm not as sinister as my writings would suggest. I don't think most writers are, to be honest.
Yeah, it's true, it's true. I'm probably sure that Steve King likes to drop acid and just watch goats over there.
It always seems to be the case that, there's this pervasive thing. I don't think it's true of Lovecraft, funnily enough. He's the exception that proves the rule. But there seems to be this thing that writers of really dark subject matter, writers who really dredge the depths of the subconscious, who rake through the guts and the entrails and the sewage of humanity, are actually really nice people. Yeah. By and large, they're kind of calm and placid and conversational. Lovecraft wasn't.
No.
At all. at all by any stretch.
But I am fairly convinced that if you had a Sunday dinner with Clive Barker, you'd come out laughing.
I, from what I understand, yes. I don't know whether you've ever heard any of the interviews or the podcasts or whatever that he's done, but he seems to be quite a bubbly bloke. As does Stephen King. Stephen King just seems to have a nice sort of edge of sarcasm to him. The only one who sort of who is as you'd expect him to be is probably Harlan Ellison.
Yeah, I think he's just a sour-faced tool.
He's an amazing curmudgeon, isn't he? Oh, absolutely amazing curmudgeon. But hypnotic.
I wouldn't be surprised if he's actually copyrighted the sentence, "Damn kids, get off my lawn."
Wouldn't surprise me in the least. He is litigious and unpleasant, but I kind of like him.
Yeah, it's entertainingly so. You get the feel. It's like how Harrison Ford was for years, where you just get the feeling that somewhere in the back of his mind, he's having a brilliant laugh at how he's presenting himself to the world.
Absolutely. Yep, definitely.
But, anyhow, so as always, we are all here to discuss H.P. Lovecraft and a H.P. Lovecraft adaptation. So, to get this ball rolling, or to make it more horror-themed, to get this baby's head rolling down the hill, join the other baby's heads at the bottom of the well, to feed corn, blood for the blood god. George,
hello.
There's a question I ask every guest that we have on here. How did you get into H.P. Lovecraft? What are your experiences?
That's actually kind of interesting. I was, when it came to Lovecraft specifically, I came to his work really rather late. I discovered his books and his short stories when I was at university. So that I was in my mid-20s at that. I think my earliest experience of Lovecraft was, like many of my generation, through other work. It was through Lovecraftian stories and films and stuff that had been touched by his influence, by his resonance, or inspired by him, rather than by Lovecraft himself. Films like Alien. Alien is an excellent example of a film that's not necessarily Lovecraftian, but is definitely touched by Lovecraft. I mean, obviously the film has a lot of Giger's designs in it, and Giger has gone on record many, many times talking about how Lovecraft is his favorite writer, and inspired so many of his paintings, including the Necronom 2, which eventually became the Alien.
Yes.
So it was really through that, and through short stories like, say, Stephen King's The Mist, which is incredibly Lovecraftian. I mean, The Mist is almost just a huge homage to H.P. Lovecraft's stories. It has everything you'd want from a Lovecraft story without actually being Lovecraft. It has the sort of cosmic nihilism, the utter hopelessness that you get from Lovecraft. It has the tentacle monsters. It has the notion that humanity is very, very, very small and insignificant and will just be obliterated like that, like in an instant, without any grand fulfillment of destiny or any great fanfare. It will just be
sniffed out. Yeah.
That's what The Mist has, and that's a Lovecraftian trope. I mean, I know that's quite... It's relatively common in fiction these days, certainly in popular fiction, but there were very, very few stories at the time of H.P. Lovecraft's writing, certainly in his particular genre, that did that. Horror tended to have a certain hopefulness to it. It tended to reinforce cultural norms rather than questioning them. You know, it was a case of, at the end of the story, the vampire would be destroyed, the demon would be exorcised, or whatever. Something would be reinforced at the end. That's not the case with Lovecraft at all.
No.
It's exactly the opposite. He goes for absolute cosmic nihilism. He goes for the fact that humanity is insignificant, that it exists by chance in a cosmos that is at best indifferent to it, and will just wipe it out arbitrarily, and at worst hostile, actively hostile towards it, which it certainly is in Lovecraft's universe. It certainly is.
It's anything that finds itself on Earth is instantly hostile towards humanity, unless it's the backdrop to the stories. When it's the backdrop to the stories, it's usually something that could not care less about
Absolutely.
these little human germs running around underfoot. But when it's stuff like the case of Charles Dexter Ward, it is actively hostile. It is
actively hostile.
going
They
for
require. It's either that these entities, these extra dimensional cosmic beings, they either regard us as cattle, or as accidents, or as nothing, as vermin, in the same way we would regard bacteria or as ants. That's the level that these creatures are operating on. But I came to his short stories as a result of reading other writers who talked about him and who were influenced by him. Neil Gaiman absolutely adores Lovecraft and has written some fantastic parodies of Lovecraft. I actually read before I read any of Lovecraft's stories, things like Shoggoth's Old Peculiar,
yes,
which is a great short story, which involves two characters from Innsmouth, Lovecraft's fictional town, sitting at the bar, talking about Lovecraft, talking about his fiction and about how it gets it totally wrong, and about how his prose is risible, but it's not in a hateful way. It's not in a sort of hypercritical way. It's quite affectionate. But I went out after reading these other writers talking about him. I went out and bought pretty much everything he'd ever written, and I found that initially I found him very hard to get on with.
yes.
Very hard, which I think a lot of people have. I think a lot of people have that reaction to him initially, because his writing is not, it's not palatable to a modern eye or to a postmodern eye at all. It's verbose and it's overly complex and it's very risible. I mean, it's totally risible in many, many respects. You know, when you've got multiple adjectives, when you've got subclause upon subclause upon subclause upon subclause. There is, and I reread it recently, and I remember reading it for the first time. The first short story of his I read was not a very short story. It was At the Mountains of Madness.
Yes.
Which is a great place to start. Brilliant place to start. But there is a paragraph in that story that goes on for a page and a half.
Yep, there is.
You actually find yourself stopping at the end of it and going, where did that begin? I've no idea what he's talking about. I've got to go back and reread it. And that it's something that I think that you have to cultivate. It's like the taste for wine or for something. Like you need to cultivate a taste for Lovecraft before you start to enjoy him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I was in college when I first came across Lovecraft, and the first few things I got into, the first few things I read, I found it very, very difficult to read. And I ended up reading more about the background of the man and the background of how, we can get into that if you want. It's to the background of how he wrote things and what caused him to write things. And so when I came back to the 2-book collection that I bought from a charity shop, I actually found it a lot easier after reading that. You could sort of, you almost could resonate with the man himself. You could see where he was coming from, the style of speech he was using.
I think it develops a degree of affection for the man. I mean, there are elements of Lovecraft that are hateful. You know, he was a horrible racist and a white supremacist and a horrendous anti-Semite.
I'd use the term good-natured bigot, I think.
But he wasn't particularly active in that regard. He wasn't sort of politically active. And when you learn more about the man, it becomes very clear that he was terribly afraid.
Yes.
And probably quite neurotic. He had a fair few problems. I think, having read a great deal about him and watched documentaries, I think that he would quite probably be classified, he would certainly be classified as some form of depressive. Mm-hmm. That's without doubt. But I also think he was probably on the autistic spectrum to a very significant degree.
I would agree with that.
Which I do believe influenced what he wrote about. I mean, there is this incredible... One of the things he reminds me of a little bit is Philip K. Dick in a bizarre kind of way. You know how Philip K. Dick fills his stories with this incredible paranoia?
Yes, yeah.
Where you can't be certain of anything. You cannot be certain of any... Even your own mind might be manufactured. That's what Philip K. Dick says. There's a kind of similar thing going on in Lovecraft where it's just total horror and dread, a perpetual cosmic dread, where all of the cultivations of humankind, all of its achievements and its revelations and its discoveries mean nothing. Ultimately, we're still wallowing around in ignorance, and there are certain things that that our intellect cannot or should not touch, because it just can't deal with them. I mean, one of the things I like about Lovecraft a lot is the way that he describes madness, or the way that his characters become insane, which is usually by exposure to something.
I thought you were going to say it is usually by writing it down on a piece of paper slowly.
Again, one of the more visible elements of Lovecraft. When you first come to him, it's something you've got to get over, really, I suppose. I can't remember which one it is. I think it's the case of Charles Dexter Ward, but I'm not certain, where it's told in retrospect. You've got this character who is insane. It's Dagon, isn't it? It's Dagon, where he's been driven insane, and he's sitting writing retrospectively in a journal in an insane asylum in the asylum at Arkham, and he's saying things like, "Oh my God, it's at the window." He's writing this down as he's going. "Oh, it's turning the doorknob. Oh my God!" And it ends where this thing comes into the room, and the guy is still writing.
So, as a storytelling device, it works when you're reading it.
It does.
It's not until afterwards you think about it. It's, hang on a second.
Yeah, actually, you do find yourself going back and thinking, well, why was the arsehole still writing?
Well, to be fair, he was in an insane asylum at that point, so it's
fair point.
Where's he going to go, eh?
He's just like the monster. I'm not done yet. Hang on. Hang on. Still no.
Puts his hand up. You can devour me entirely in just a minute.
I'm nearly done. This is my masterpiece, sir. If I'm going to be killed, I want to finish this, are we? Common decency.
This is my fancy fountain pen, and I'm going to finish write this.
And it happens a lot. It happens a lot in Lovecraft. Almost all of his stories are retrospective, actually. They're in the form of the journalistic stories of the 19th century, sort of the turn of the century, which he was absolutely obsessed by. Absolutely obsessed with sort of Victoriana, with the cultural upheavals that were occurring at that time. The scientific discovery, the replacement of traditional religion by science, and the notion that we might discover something that we're not supposed to discover.
Have you ever read his letters?
I've read a couple of them, yeah. I mean, some of them will you, and some of them really won't, because of the incredible racism that he evinced. But as I say, I do think that exposure to the man's more documentary stuff, where he's sort of talking about how he feels about things, the sort of sickliness and the perpetual dread that he seemed to exist in of everything, absolutely everything, the sense of failure that he had about himself. He hated his own work. Oh, yeah. Absolutely hated it. There's this talk of him sort of redrafting his stories multiple times, chucking it out, destroying entire manuscripts because he just couldn't stand it. He was his own worst enemy and his own worst critic, and that endears you to the man massively.
But he had a massive fear, and it seems to be the thing that drove a lot of his stories, was he had a massive fear of being insane. It ran in his family.
Yes.
And with his incredibly weird, especially for the time, incredibly strange upbringing that he had, entirely matriarchal, for want of a better term.
Yeah, and fairly unhealthy, I suspect. I mean, it's difficult to say for certain, but there are little things about his relationship with women in particular, and his sort of the way he responds to the world, that suggests to me that even if he wasn't directly abused, it was a very strange relationship that he had. And we know that both his mother and his father went insane. They actually died in asylums.
Yeah. I think his father contracted syphilis, and that's what sent him. I think it was his mother. Something to do with the childbirth, I seem to remember, but I can't.
I'm sure there was something about that, but she used to do very odd things, didn't she? Like that. I mean, Lovecraft writes about this, where he was very sick for a long period of his childhood. He didn't go to school for, I think it was about a year, wasn't it? He didn't go out at all. He was in his attic room looking out, and she would tell everyone that he was too ugly to be outside. And she would tell him as well, that's why he wasn't going outside, that he was too ugly to go outside. And, there are photographs of the man. He's not an ugly man.
No,
He's not an ugly man at all.
he was just a average person.
Just an average... Yeah.
He's got the features of an average person, but his eyes tell a completely different story.
Absolutely. And he talks about in his letters, like, wandering the streets in a daze of absolute terror, just social, it's what would be called social anxiety now. He was terrified of people talking to him, but terrified of being locked up inside as well. Yeah. Just being in an absolute hysteria. Yeah.
This from what the letters, especially the letters he wrote to come on, Adam, Robert E. Howard. Is that right? Who wrote Conan?
Yes,
yeah. My brain just didn't seem to tell me that was right there. A lot of that appears to be that the sort of fear that he felt in his 20s just became this humdrum background noise when he reached into his 30s. And that sounds to me like one of the worst experiences that you could have, where you become so used to being scared by everything, you no longer notice it.
Yeah, I mean that's an awful place to be in. I mean, it's hardly surprising that he died as young as he did. I mean, he was only in his 50s, wasn't he, when he finally died?
52, I think.
52, right? That's not surprising, and it's also not surprising that he found it very difficult to form enduring relationships beyond his correspondence. I mean, he had many and varied correspondence. He would talk to lots of people via his letters, but he would very rarely interact with actual people.
Yeah. It's one of those things that's now been lost pretty much to the annals of time, that I would love to know more about his relationship when he was married.
Yeah. God, that
short marriage that he had.
That whole thing was weird. I mean, first of all, she was Jewish. He was a very open anti-Semite. I mean, it's very open, which is also in his stories. I mean, this is another thing that you need to forgive in order to appreciate Lovecraft. And for some people, that will be a breaking point. They will not be able to get past that. But the raw fact of the matter is, in Lovecraft stories, if someone of an ethnic minority comes along, if someone who is Jewish comes along, if someone who is basically not a WASP, white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, preferably moneyed, comes along, then they are going to start sprouting tentacles at some point. That's a given. And the way he's...
Second, all I could think of was David Icke.
Oh, man. Oh, reptilians and Nibiru. Well, the weird thing is, there is a Lovecraftian element to that mythology as well.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. There so is. The funny thing about David Icke's sort of reptilian Nibiru conspiracy theory thing is that it's a great metaphor. Were it not promoted as something literal, then it would actually be a very functional metaphor for certain dynamics in society, which Lovecraft was kind of cognizant of. And the imagery is very Lovecraftian as well.
Yeah. I do like the fact, it's one of my favourite stories of all time, that David Icke had to go onto national TV at one point and explain to people, no, I'm not talking about the Jews. I'm talking about actual lizard people. It come from the centre of the earth.
This is not a metaphor. Okay. I am not sort of talking in similes or in imagery here. I mean literal lizard people.
Reptile people for the sector of the earth.
This is not something anti-Semitic at all. This is if it's prejudice against anyone, it's prejudice against lizard people.
So the two things I love about David Icke is whenever he starts talking, he starts to make a lot of sense until he gets to the reptile people.
Until he starts talking about reptiles and circles and just the really weird paranoid stuff. Mm-hmm. Which is so easy to slip into.
Yeah.
It's so easy to slip into. And
it is a very much if they're there for the grace of God, go, aye.
Absolutely. I think if you have an imagination, if you have any kind of imagination, it's so easy to slip into that. And Lovecraft so did. I mean, Lovecraft didn't believe his stories. He didn't. There are people who do, though.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there are people who do. I've spoken to a couple of them, and they are fantastic. There are actual Cthulhu cultists.
Yes.
There are people who think that the great old ones exist,
Mhm.
that what Lovecraft was doing in his stories was channeling them somehow, that he had some sort of connection to the truth, but didn't realize it, so set it down as fiction.
Yeah.
And they sort of take his stories as holy writ, as sort of almost like a biblical, which is interesting.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, I mean, a lot of Lovecraft's stories came from the sort of night terrors and dreams that he had, which is why I think a lot of them are so both abstract and so visceral in their horror, for one of the better terms. Whenever he really gets his teeth into describing how undescribable something is, it very much feels like a dream.
It does, and he just goes, doesn't he? He just,
very much.
It's where any sort of discipline he has as a writer kind of breaks down. Certainly in the earlier stories that he wrote, it just goes on and on and on, adding these layers of description. I mean, a really good example is in At the Mountains of Madness, which is one of the more coherent stories generally, and one of the better written ones. But there is a point at which he describes the great old ones. And it just goes on and on and on. And he keeps adding these anatomical details and sort of prognoses on what this particular thing did, what this limb does, what this organ does, this might have been for. It has this starfish-shaped head, which could have been for this. It has these multiple membranous wings that could have been for this. It is shaped like a cucumber, which allows it to do this. It has this bizarre foot, which splays out underneath it like an umbrella, which allows it to do this. And it just goes on forever. I mean, they're fantastically realized. You don't get monsters like Lovecraft's monsters unless it's someone trying to emulate Lovecraft.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? Going down that sort of true horrific nature of a monster, you're basically always going to be aping what Lovecraft did.
Yeah, you can't escape it.
Yeah,
you can't escape it.
It's a win or lose. You just can't do it.
No, if you operate in particular kinds of... In fact, it doesn't have to be particular kinds of fiction. If you operate in fiction at all, in any form, you are going to be touched by Lovecraft in some way, shape or form. If you operate in particular genres, in horror or in science fiction or fantasy, you will be touched by it. There are resonances of Lovecraft in pretty much everything. It's a really interesting state of affairs when you consider that when he was alive and when he was writing, he was not that significant at all.
No, he really wasn't. It actually took a lot of work for people to get his work published.
Yes, it was his friends, wasn't it?
Yeah.
They really saw the merit in what he was doing. They really saw it. And by all accounts, when he was alive, it was impossible to get him to do it because he wasn't that concerned about publication as such, just about getting his message out there. And also practicing the craft. He was obsessed with the craft of it.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely obsessed. If you look at, there are a couple of his manuscripts that actually exist, because a lot of his stories were published posthumously. They were found at his desk and then published by his friends and by whoever happened across them.
So I think Weird Tales ended up with loads of unpublished stuff that they never put out originally. And then about 1970 or so, they just threw everything they had out that they discovered they had, which caused the first real big resurgence of Lovecraft.
That's right. It was sort of in the 70s into the 80s, wasn't it?
Yes,
That was when... he sort of, there was something that snared in the cultural consciousness and he became huge. I mean, I think almost all of the copies of Lovecraft I have are from that era. They're originally published in that era. And you can tell the books are gorgeous. They've got that lovely sort of 1970s vibe about them, the hand-painted covers with the very peculiar monstrosities in the mountains in the distance. And I love that. I love it. I think it's so resonant of that era. Absolutely love it.
I've always wanted to know, you get asked the question, who would you like to have a dinner party? And I'd always like to have Lovecraft, and it's to ask him two very simple questions. One, this is a board game based on the works of yours. How do you feel about it? Because I feel that would be a no. And secondly is, you are now an incredibly famous author. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I imagine. I mean, have you seen that episode of Doctor Who with Van Gogh?
Yes.
There's the ending sequence to that. I would love to bring Lovecraft to about now. I mean, there are certain things about now he would probably have a heart attack at, but just so he could see how significant he has become. I mean, if you look at Stephen King is one of the biggest selling authors in all of human history. His work is everywhere. It's been you can find it in the back end of Beyond. I'm sure if you searched long enough and hard enough, you would find dog-eared copies of The Stand somewhere in the deepest Brazilian rainforest.
Just in kind of ignorant description, just sitting there reading it.
Yep. Dropped by some itinerant tourist or whatever. But and Stephen King is unabashed. You know, he is directly influenced by Lovecraft. I mean, he's one of those people who read Lovecraft when he was a kid and read him from cover to cover to cover and read everything he'd ever published. And you can see it in his fiction. To think, I think, for Lovecraft that he'd had that kind of influence, that his work and the resonance of his work is so far flung that it's everywhere now. It's it's in the hands of and being read by people that he probably would have hated with a fiery passion. I think there would have been a spark of joy at that. Although I do believe that if he ever saw a Cthulhu plushie, I think his head would explode.
That's the type of thing I really want to know. It's this is called a Xbox. This is how you play games. This is Shadow over Innsmouth. I'm just going to sit back now and just watch what happens.
Well, I know there is one thing I know that he would dislike. I mean, that game is very good. I love Shadows over Innsmouth. I think it's a really good game for the most part. But he wouldn't like the portrayal of some of the creatures like Dagon and like Cthulhu because they're not meant to be portrayed.
No,
They are indescribable. He's very clear about that. The anatomical details that he applies to creatures like Cthulhu, as specific as they are meant to give you an impression of what human eyes can perceive.
Yes.
They're not supposed to be literal.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because Cthulhu is probably one of the most portrayed horror entities.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Cthulhu at this point is probably more well known for being a parody of himself than the original character. Well, the original character is the wrong word. Concept, I think, would probably be a better terminology for it. But, the Cthulhu for president, the plush Cthulhus, as you say, on the front of horror magazines and
Lego
metal magazines. Lego Cthulhu, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
There are people who know Cthulhu who have never read an inch of Lovecraft, never read a word of Lovecraft, but know who Cthulhu is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's both a glorious thing and a terrible thing. It's the sort of commodification of Cthulhu.
Yes.
And the crystallization of what he's supposed to look like is a problem for the stories. Because it can be risible. It can be very risible, the Cthulhu creature. And I've seen some portrayals of it that are awful.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely dreadful. Because they're just too literal. And that's the problem with most of them. Even the good ones are way too literal.
It is literally a squid on a dragon's body.
Exactly that. It's a big sort of flabby titan with an octopus head and little stubby wings, which those are the attributes he applies to it in the Call of Cthulhu. But as he made very clear in his correspondence, that's what human eyes perceive of it because that's all they can.
Mm-hmm.
Just to look upon Cthulhu, just to be near it is to invite madness. You can't even in his sort of soporific state, asleep, he is the source of all human madness. He drives human beings insane with his dreams. Yeah.
It's just the nature of the mad god that he is.
Yeah, he is indescribable in many ways, like almost everything.
It's going back to the, I was going to mention this before, in the Mountains of Madness, there is a point where the creature was indescribable, and then Lovecraft goes on for 5 paragraphs to
describe it.
Yes.
Yeah.
But as much as we could sit here and talk about this, and I've realised how much we are talking about it, let's move on a little bit. Because we watched a film, and now we're going to talk about that film. And probably in a much faster rendition than we normally would. So, this isn't going to work. We're going to end up having the longest Lurkers in the lobby. I think.
Why possibly be the case?
I can feel it in my bones. So, we watched Dreams in the Witch House. So I'm going to ask you both this going in. We'll start with Andy. what did you know of Dreams of the Witch House, and what were you expecting when you went into it?
What I knew was I'd seen this a while ago. I think when you started up Lurkers in the lobby and you gave me a plethora of Lovecraftian things to watch, and you said, this is one of the good ones. And I went, oh, okay. I had heard of Masters of Horror, which is what this was. Masters of Horror was a TV show series, I suppose, that used works of fiction, and it was just a director, and they would do their own little twist on the story, or their own interpretation of the story to the best that they can with a TV budget around 2005-ish.
Yeah, 2005,
something like that. So they had a budget.
Oh, this is 11 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Think about that.
Yeah, it's slightly painful, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh. Wow. I think it's quite telling as well when you watch this that it is 11 years old. Bless it. But apart from that, I didn't really know anything about it. I assumed it would have a witch in it and a house, and it would involve dreams. It hit every nail.
All safe bets, though.
Yes.
And Mr. George, what did you expect, and how much of it did you know before going into it?
Well, I've read the original short story, and I must admit, I was surprised that they went for that one. I was really surprised. It is one of the simpler Lovecraft stories to adapt in many respects. It's a very straight story for Lovecraft. It's got a very definite rhythm and a very definite structure, which a lot of Lovecraft stuff doesn't. And some of the images are easy to portray visually. I mean, the rat with the human face and all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, what's the rat's name?
Oh, it's Brown Jenkins or something.
There we go.
What? Brown Jenkins.
Yep, the rat is called Brown Jenkins.
That's its name. Yeah, it's the witch's familiar. But at the same time, there are certain elements which are next to impossible to visually realize because they're not supposed to be. There are points part of the whole mythology of the short story is this whole it ties into this obsession Lovecraft had with angles and with strange geometries, that if you could somehow bring particular geometries, very abstract, weird geometries together, you could sort of open a way through to other planes of existence. That's the whole thesis of Dreams of the Witch House. And this house is structured, one room and one wall of this room is structured in such a manner that where the angles come together, it opens a way into some non-Euclidean plane of weirdness, which Lovecraft describes in the most abstract terms imaginable. There are points where the occupant of the room, the student, who the main character's name who escapes me at the moment.
In the film, it's
Gilman.
Walter Gilman,
isn't it? It's Gilman. That's right, Walter Gilman. He sees it open. He sees the way open. And you don't know whether he's dreaming or whether he's awake. It's very abstract. And he's sort of projected into this space that's not in the wall. It's beyond the wall. It's beyond reality. And he flies through this freaky, deaky, weird space that's filled with strange dimensions and things that the human eye is not meant to be able to perceive and that the mind is not be able to comprehend, and so on and so forth, which is not in the film. No. Unsurprisingly. I mean, even with a budget, that would be so difficult to portray. I would love to see certain directors and certain filmmakers give it a go.
Oh yeah, I've been really, really, really wishing that Del Toro's Mountains of Madness would actually happen.
I mean, I said never will, but if that could be that film, couldn't it? It could be that film that completely resurrects horror. Yes. It happens every so often. You get these films that make horror viable again in mainstream cinema, and that one, if he gets it right, could be the one, because there are things in At the Mountains of Madness that have never been on cinema before. Never, ever. Not in all of its history. If it's done right. Yeah. But it's going to, even if he does do it, if he manages to get the project off the ground, it's going to be really difficult. He's set himself a
mountain of madness.
You're the worst. No, always how this podcast is over.
Sit alone, I quit.
That's it.
It'll never get any better. Okay, so what we're going to do is, just to keep it speedy, I'm going to go from person to person to person, and I want you to bring forth a point, either good or bad, about the film that we watched. And we'll just discuss that point rather than sitting here and going through the film section by section.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll kick it off with Mr. Millman.
Yes.
What is the first point you'd like to make about this film?
Well, I don't know if it's really explained in the book, but his next door neighbor who has a baby.
Yes.
After knowing him for less than a day, she has a job interview and gives him his baby, gives her the baby. I when I was watching it today, I was like, you don't know him. I know he gave you like $50, which is fine, but that doesn't mean he's capable of raising your child in this horrible squalor of an apartment that you have. What are you doing? And she also didn't really question the fact that when he left the child after a dream sequence, that somehow the door was locked.
Yep.
He didn't have a key. It was never brought up. Is that ever covered in the book? Because
actually, that's it's something that I'd certainly noticed when the film started. She's not actually in the book. She is her name is it Elwood? Ellie? Francis, yeah. She is actually Frank Elwood in the book. It's he.
Ooh, yeah, makes the scene with the witch first appearance a little bit more disturbing if that was the case. Is that you, Frank?
This is one of the elements of the film I didn't like very much. She was only introduced to introduce a sort of potentially romantic sexual element, which isn't Lovecraft.
No.
There's his work is almost it's shorn of sexuality. It's almost completely asexual. The only time any kind of sexuality is even referred to is when you have sort of elder things from beyond crossbreeding with humans and producing these oddly goatish children who grow up to be very weird, who tend to like to inhabit graveyards and perform weird chemical experiments, and who inevitably sprout tentacles before the end. That's the only time you get even a reference to sexuality in Lovecraft, and I don't like the addition of it in the film. I don't think it works with Lovecraft.
No, I think the only time that Lovecraft ever talked about sex in any way, shape, or form is Dunwich Horror, isn't it? That I'm trying to remember what her name was. Waitley.
Oh, it's been so long since I read that story.
Lavinia.
That's right.
Lavinia Waitley. She did the dirty with Yogg Goff.
That's right. Yes, and had a sort of brood.
Yes. Yeah.
Of children with him. Yeah. That's right.
The TV adaptation again?
I have done everything in my power to remove that from my brain.
I think she was. I think she was in the really bad, talcum powder makeup.
Yeah. Yeah. That film is why I drink heavily.
Oh, George, you should watch that. You should
I've
watch
never
this.
seen it, but I tell you what, the Dunwich Horror is one of those, I don't even know how on earth you could make a film of it. It defeats me entirely. There are certain things in that story that are essential to the story. I don't know how you could possibly portray them. It's impossible. It's actually impossible without rewriting something fundamental within the story. But yeah, it's something I definitely noticed. There is with Dreams in the Witch House, there is a problem with the modernization of it. It can be done. It has been done in some adaptations. I mean, again, In the Mouth of Madness, which is not a direct adaptation of a Lovecraft story, but is a very good example of how you transplant Lovecraftian themes into a postmodern setting. It can be done. In this instance, I think it was a mistake.
Well, outside of being, pardon me, outside of saying, well, I study quantum physics, didn't need to be.
No, it didn't work for me. I didn't like the character was about the right age. He is. I mean, in the book,
Was he?
He is a youth.
Was he?
Well, is he a little bit older?
He is.
Yes, he is a student, but
Did you recognise him? Anybody?
No.
Oh, you really?
Not at all.
Because this is the second go-around for this actor in a H.P. Lovecraft film.
Really?
It's the second go-around for this actor in a H.P. Lovecraft film done by Stuart Gordon.
That didn't help. I don't remember actors or people.
He was the main character in Dagon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Man, yeah.
Oh, I guess she got to fuck him in the end.
I don't know why that didn't click, but it really...
What you do is he doesn't look. He looks younger in this, which was next 4 years later.
So he has a weird kind of Lovecraft pedigree going on.
I'm just upset that I think he wasn't in it. From Reanimator. Andy, you love very free.
He is.
Yeah, Jeffrey Combs.
He's fantastic.
I would love to have seen Jeffrey Combs as Brown Jenkins.
He is. I mean, I love him in everything, but, he's better suited to the slightly more comedic one.
Yes.
Insofar as you can get comedic in Lovecraft, and Reanimator is about as close as you can get.
Well, he is skinny Bruce Campbell.
Yeah, he so is. I mean, in fact, he's even more intense than Bruce Campbell is. And you see, as Herbert West, he's completely manic.
Oh, yes.
The intensity of him, he just boils on the screen. You're just waiting for him to pop a vein or have an aneurysm or something. Perfect as one of Lovecraft's slightly more obsessive characters, and there's lots of them. It's and Herbert West is probably the most obsessive of the obsessives.
I want to see him play Charles Dexter Ward.
Yeah, actually, I think he'd be quite good as Charles Dexter Ward. I'd go for that.
Oh, yeah, I want to see him as Thingy. But he goes with the cats to the moon.
Oh, friggin' hell, yeah. Oh, that is one of the weirdest Lovecraft ever.
Hang on. Cats to the moon.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely.
Goes with cats to the moon.
All right.
Well, all of a sudden, cats took him to the moon.
Yeah, it's one of the most... It's completely different from everything else he's written. It's like this weird metaphysical acid trip. And it's actually not a hopeless story either.
No.
That one's more sort of fantastical, I suppose, and it has a more sort of religious bent to it, or at least a spiritual bent to it, than all of his other stuff.
I like to think that he spent a night on ayahuasca, and this is what came out.
You know what? That would not surprise me in the least. It is so different from everything he's ever written, and the imagery in it is so redolent of when you are on a trip of particular things. So redolent indeed. I mean, maybe by accident, maybe he had a fever or something, or maybe he ate some bad grain or something.
He just had some slightly off porridge.
Yeah, but he was tripping balls when he wrote that. There's no doubt about it. No doubt.
What happened to you? Bad porridge, man. I love the idea that Lovecraft was so insular and so messed up. Bad porridge sent him on a fever trip.
I know, that's kind of sad, isn't it? There is something kind of sad about that. It wasn't even intentional.
No.
It's through eating is probably quite milky and bland porridge.
Oh, somebody accidentally put some cumin in it or something.
That was enough.
I can see colours and taste colours.
No, I mean, it is one of the significant problems with this adaptation. I think most adaptations of Lovecraft, that they attempt to modernize it, and it can be done, but in this instance, I think it dilutes it quite significantly.
Have you watched any of the H.P. Lovecraft Historical Society films?
I haven't, no.
The Call of Cthulhu is legitimately a worthwhile experience. I think it's probably one of the more interesting experiments in making a Lovecraft film, because it's entirely black and white and it's entirely silent.
Right, so it's kind of abstract anyway. That's probably one of the best ways to do a Lovecraft film, to be honest.
Then a couple of years later, they did
Whispers in the Darkness.
That's the one, Whispers in the Darkness.
Yeah.
And that is done. It's black and white again, but it does have sound, and that works very, very well.
Yeah. Highly recommend them. Both really
I might have to have a quick peek at those, but no, I've never seen them.
Yeah, it's very much worth it. George, what's the point you'd like to make about the film? For good or for ill?
I think one of the principal things for me that I really noticed is when you read the short story, you get a real sense of place, as you often do in Love. I mean, he concentrates more on setting an environment than he does on character for the most part. Characters are kind of incidental to him. Characters tend to be vehicles or avatars for the reader.
Yes.
They're just there to see the weird, freaky deaky stuff and either go mad as a result, or to describe their basically melting sanity to the reader. That's all they're there for. Setting is where you get a real sense of ethos and sort of depth from him. He describes settings so minutely, but so well. So beautifully, just huge, particularly sort of urban and suburban environments, which tend to be places like Arkham, which is where this story is supposed to be set. And Arkham in the books is a city. It's this rambling sort of gothic, weird place. It's a bit like Gotham City. It's got that. It wouldn't. I mean, given the Lovecraftian influence in Batman, which is huge, there's Arkham Asylum. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Gotham is based on Arkham. Wouldn't be surprised at all.
Well, yeah, that was, I think, was it Bob Kane? Or was it Bill Finger? No, it was Bill Finger. Bill Finger had come out many, many years ago talking about how he'd found Lovecraft stories, and that's, when I say many, many years ago, I'm talking decades ago, and that's what shaped his ideas of how Gotham should look.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me in the least. I mean, Arkham is this... It's bizarrely un-American, strangely. It's not like it's more like a British Victorian. It's like Victorian London, essentially.
Yes and no. It's halfway between where Edgar Allan Poe would conjure up his imagery of how the sort of crusty old castles and the crumbling moors would look. It's Edgar Allan Poe's brain set out, but it's overlaid with this almost love affair with how Lovecraft thinks Europe should look.
It should look, yeah. He has this sort of idealization, doesn't it? Not how it does look or how it did look, but how he thinks it should feel. And it's very exaggerated, like most portrayals of Gotham.
Yes, yeah.
Very exaggerated and stylized. It's sort of like black spires and sort of strange, huge, decrepit factories and churches and things like that. And the university, of course, Miskatonic University. That's where this story is set. But you get, largely, I imagine, due to budgetary constraints, but you get no sense of that from this adaptation. In fact, you don't even see, you see hardly anything outside of the house.
Yeah, it is down to budgetary restrictions, isn't it? I mean, the story got chopped down to bits.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only time you ever see anything with the Miskatonic University is when he is sitting in a chair, pantless.
Yes, when he gets transported there, yeah. And you get a brief glimpse of probably Lovecraft's most iconic creation, the Necronomicon.
Mm-hmm.
Which is in everything.
Yeah.
The Necronomicon is probably right up there with Cthulhu, if not more so. It is the thing that people, again, a thing that people think is real.
Oh God, yeah.
They think that it exists or that he made it up.
Yep.
There is an Egyptian Book of the Dead, but it's not some sort of like tome or grimoire bound in human skin. It's just a record of dead people.
Yes.
That's all it is.
It's the actual Book of Dead Names.
That's exactly what it says. Exactly what it is. That's what it is.
Libya. I can't remember now. It's Libya something.
Yeah, and that's all it is. There's nothing arcane about it. There's nothing sort of mystical about it as such. But the Necronomicon is something he created, and it has seeped into popular culture. And you get a brief glimpse of it in this film, and it's not a great portrayal.
Is it just me, or does it look like the sleepy version of the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead?
It did. It looked like maybe the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead suffering from a bit of insomnia.
Give me coffee. Don't you need human flesh and bones? Give me coffee. Yes, I've got a bit of a cold.
But again, you're not supposed to be able to read the Necronomicon or open it without sort of unleashing hell. You're not supposed to be able to scan it without going completely bonkers.
Did either of you find it funny when the librarian went, and how did you get this book? No one's meant to read the Necronomicon. Do you feel either A, she should reach at the camera, or then just have like a weird shadow happen in the background?
It was just too much, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was too much. Again, the thing about Miskatonic University, it is not in the books. Miskatonic is not necessarily a sinister place.
No,
as such, it just so happens that because they offer some very strange courses, which I think our character here is on one of those very strange courses, which involves non-Euclidean geometry and whatnot. There is a tendency for its students to do very odd things and to ultimately become involved with abomination or to go mad, or both.
Funnily enough, they were the first university to set up the safe zone spaces.
You know what? Arkham needs them. I mean, it needs them. It really does. Although in Miskatonic, the safe spaces involve drawing sort of pentagram.
No, Shoggost, you can't enter my safe space. I'm okay here.
I do really want to go on the How to Go Mad and Write It Down course.
Tickly.
But yeah, it's...
Yeah, and your teacher for this course will be Mr. Tickley.
It's not necessarily a fault of the adaptation as such. It's a fault of even making the attempt. Yeah. Trying to adapt this story is really hard. It'd be really hard if you had an infinite budget, let alone within the restrictions of television. So what you ultimately end up with is a slightly too brightly lit, slightly too quick, sort of fast-running, fast-paced, slightly lacking in atmosphere adaptation of the original story, with a lot of the weirdness that makes it interesting cut out.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the major issues I've got with the film is it all takes place over 3 days, whilst I got the feeling from the original story that it takes place over months.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's again another problem
Yep.
with attempting to adapt Lovecraft. A lot of his stories do. In fact, all of them do. I can't think of one that is like a more traditional horror story where it does occur in the moment, in a sequence of events. There are very few that do that. It's always sort of these vast sojourns or investigations that have to be planned for, that have teams of experts or whatever, or that require vast periods of inactivity and study and whatnot. And it makes adaptation difficult.
I would say Rats in the Walls is probably the fastest then, because that takes place over weeks, doesn't it?
Yes, that's probably the one. And that's probably the easiest to adapt, because there's nothing massively weird in the Rats in the Walls, and it's a simple concept. It's about what it says on the tin. It's demonic sort of rats infesting.
Actually, the easiest one to adapt would be the one about the white gorilla. Unfortunately, I don't think that would be a good idea to make that story.
To be honest, there's a racist.
I was going to say, is it a wee bit on the racist side? It sounds
just a little bit on the racist side. Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. Yeah, the metaphors are not subtle.
No.
Good.
Myself, I'm going to throw something out that really annoyed me the first time I watched it, and it really annoyed me this time. There's actually two things I want to talk about that are really annoying, but I'll go for the first one. For some unknown reason, the adaptation decides to make it a little bit satanic.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't need to be, because the original book has the stone statue of the elder things. It's all to do with what the hell is she called? Mason, Kaiser Mason.
That's right.
The Salem witch. It's all to do with the fact that she is doing stuff for Nyarlathotep. It's all within the cycle. But in this, it's not Satan.
It's they drop some of the more abstruse elements, don't they, of the mythology, and make it just
ran completely out of it, which I thought was infuriating.
Mm-hmm. And I would imagine that that's as a result of studio interference. I imagine that someone probably got their hands on it and said, people aren't going to understand this. People, we need to make it more recognizable and sort of boil it down a little bit, simplify it. Which is why you have the satanic imagery instead of the Cthulhu or sort of the Elder Things mythology imagery in it.
Not a single star stone to be seen.
Nope.
God damn it. Andy.
Yes.
Throw us your next point.
Oh, for again, I think this is mainly a TV show thing, but for a slot into another dimension, he was able to bust his way through with a hammer fairly easily, wasn't he?
Without any consequences at all.
Nope, it was fine, because it wasn't an extra-dimensional thing. maybe, because she was just living in the loft.
Just open the wall, yeah. I mean, in the original short story, she's sort of gradually making her way towards him, isn't she? She's sort of influencing him from beyond, from whatever plane of existence that she happens to inhabit now.
Yeah.
It's not the case that she is physically in the wall as she is here.
Literally right there.
Yeah, and it does dilute it massively. I mean, I understand why they did it, because it's within the budget. It's very difficult to portray, and it's very difficult to portray anyway. But they could have gotten away with it. They could have gotten away with it by going down the sort of the Dario Argento route. You know, just the use of lighting and strange camera angles and whatnot. That could have worked.
Yeah, right. I do like the fact that to get into the attic, you can go underneath the bed.
Yes.
That was a bit strange. But no, it's what I quite like from that, using that kind of thought, is that the CSI guy, he didn't know that he'd been into another dimension. This is at the end of the film. He's like, well, there's just bones everywhere. And it's, we kept following this passageway, and it ended up being about 6 foot outside the front of the house. Couldn't work that one out, so we ignored it.
I do like that detective at the end of the feature, I suppose, where he's just like, oh yeah, the baby's got bite marks all over its neck, animal bite marks. There are like skeletons from 300 years ago of children. Yeah, the only way you could believe it is if this story's true. Who's gonna believe that?
Doesn't give a shit, does he? Just he's fucking jokes. Well, you know. Just a complete lack of engagement or imagination. You know, it's like, oh well, I've just encountered something that potentially shatters every preconception I have about life and existence and reality. Who cares?
I want to see what his reaction was when the asylum phones him up and says, "Yeah, you know that suspect? Yeah, he was killed by a rat. It looked like I don't want to nail this into a coffin or anything. It looked like it may have had a human face as it laughed as it ran past our guard.
It looked a little bit like Adam Sandler, which was the scariest thing imagined.
And yeah, very appropriate.
Very appropriate.
Very appropriate. He just sits back down as a bit. Deserved it. What? Oh wait. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Bless it.
Ah, yes.
But yeah, it seems to be one of the issues. I mean, certainly one of the issues I found with the film was that it does what a lot of Lovecraft adaptations do, which is it unintentionally becomes quite funny.
Yeah.
I mean, another thing about Lovecraft, although I was reading recently that I think it was Herbert West Reanimator was originally published in a magazine that was primarily devoted to comedy stories.
Huh.
Yes,
which
it
is
was.
interesting.
Yeah.
And it was originally marketed as a sort of very black comedy,
Which
surprises me. Really surprises me, because Lovecraft is not generally known for his sense of humor, or in any way, shape, or form. There's hardly an ounce of irony or of satire in any of his work. It's all very earnest, very deathly serious. And this particular story, there's no irony in it at all. No. It's supposed to be taken straight down the line. But this adaptation, it doesn't try to be funny. It doesn't attempt humor, but it does come off as quite humorous unintentionally, simply because of the extremity and because the images are not necessarily very well realized. Like towards the end, when the rat is sort of gnawing through his carcass, he's sort of thrashing about and there's blood flying everywhere and whatnot, which is supposed to be an horrendous scene. I'm sure it was intended as an horrendous scene.
No,
it's just not.
No, Stuart Gordon has a love of being overly gory.
Oh, yes.
It's like the point where Brown Jenkins bites down on his wrist and there's like, sign. That's hilarious, because the sheer amount of blood that's pouring out is... It's a factory full of blood.
It's ludicrous, isn't it? And that's kind of another thing as well. You know, you very rarely see blood in Lovecraft stories.
Well, no, there's no blood and gore at all. So Stuart Gordon has a tendency of adding that.
Yeah.
Like you did with Reanimator and with this.
I mean, Reanimator is an adaptation I adore. Oh, I love it. I mean, okay, it is not Lovecraft.
No.
It's Lovecraft in the sense that it takes in the same way that Kubrick's Shining is Stephen King. It takes the shell of the story, the skeleton of the story, and then adds its own bizarre muscle to it. Reanimator is exactly the same. The tone is completely different from the short story. A lot of the details are different. It is way more overt than the short story is. And this is exactly the same. Way more graphic and overt. Again, a lot of stuff in the short story is implied. A lot of it is told retrospectively. And it's not necessarily stronger for being more sort of immediate, for being more in your face. It actually dilutes the horror of the story a little bit.
It definitely needed to be more abstract. It needed to be more, what is going on here?
I agree. I mean, weirdness would have helped this a lot.
Yeah.
It really would.
It didn't need a man who I'm convinced was at some point going to say he was a Nazi war criminal, giving you the basic background.
Which one was that? Was that the landlord or the other baby killer?
Yeah, it was the other baby killer.
Okay.
I've expected that other baby killer to be a real bad one.
The baby killing aside, of course.
Oh, yeah. He didn't actually do that. He was forced into it.
And he's sort of a classic trope.
It's like that's a joke.
Oh, well.
Anyhow, yeah.
He's a classic trope in horror fiction, isn't he? He's the sort of the sage character, he's the ethnic minority who happens to know what's going on, which you find in Stephen King all the time.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. You've got Halloran in The Shining, and you've got Mother Abigail in The Stand. And you do also find in Lovecraft. In fact, he may have been, he probably wasn't the one to coin it, but he's certainly one of the ones who made it overt and brought it into the mainstream. You always have someone of an ethnic minority who knows what's going on. The main difference between them in Lovecraft and in King is that in King, they tend to be benign characters, whereas in Lovecraft, they're not. They're very they're intentional. They buy into the mythos and they enjoy what they do. They're intentionally wicked and cruel and whatever characteristics he applies to his subjects of choice.
So I was just listening there. Sitting position. I'll have to cut that bit out. I wasn't professional, man. George.
Hello.
What's your next point?
Next point. I really missed the non-Euclidean stuff.
Yes.
I really do. I mean, this story of all of them, I mean, okay, there are some that have more. In fact, there are some where they take place almost exclusively in these other dimensions and other realities that Lovecraft tries to describe whilst also emphasizing the inability to describe them. The complete impossibility of describing them. There's a lot of that in this story when you read it. A lot of it. There's none of it in this. There's none of it here at all. And it's a bit of a shame. You need it. You need it for the story to have any heft. Without it, it's quite banal.
Yeah.
It just doesn't seem to work. Nothing quite came together for me.
No.
With this adaptation, it's sort of frictionless, in the way of a slightly overproduced 1990s television show. The way they tended to be, there's a sort of plastic quality to it, which makes it difficult to get a grasp on. Mm-hmm. So you don't care. You don't care when. I mean, it tries to shock. It tries to shock a lot, and yes, there are instances in the short story that are shocking. The witch does make the character do some hideous things, or it really does. But here, the making them more visual and overt just doesn't work for me. I didn't actually care very much, to be honest. Yeah. There's a tendency for you to sort of clock watch while you're watching it, even though it's only 50 minutes long.
Yeah, it is very short and very fast, which I think goes in its favour. But as you say, that it's like throwing an orange down a smooth steel slide. It just goes humph, and that's it. That's what we're done. Yeah. See, I've got two things to think of here, and I'm going to go for the silly one first. I think because it's only short. Did anybody notice that shaved a baby?
No. What do you mean, shaved a baby?
That baby was meant to be a very young baby.
Right.
You know, a couple of weeks to months old, yeah?
Yeah.
That baby was not a couple of months old. That baby was about a year old.
Isn't it? I mean, passing that must have been...
Oh, yeah. So there's a scene where he's holding the baby up and you can tell that they've shaved the baby's head to make it look younger. And at that point, I'm just sitting there going, that's crueler than anything else this film has. They shaved a baby.
Shaved the baby.
Well, here's the real question.
Yes.
Who had the job title of baby shaver?
Do you think they're credited?
Yeah, you hope so.
Oh, that was so cool, isn't it? That'd be fantastic to have on your resume. I think.
Yeah. I worked on Dreams in the Witch House. Oh, what did you do? I was baby shaver.
Baby shaver number 1.
What do you mean, baby shaver? Well, there was a baby.
Yeah. Is that an euphemism? Is that a...
Oh, no. I mean, upright. Straight on, shave that baby.
Is that like best boy or first grip or something?
Best baby. Baby grip. Oh, man, a baby grip would be amazing.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it?
It's also known as a clamp.
Love it.
But on a more serious note, other than the baby shaving, one thing that really stands out to me here is just how much was chopped out of the original story. Now, we haven't really discussed how the story works in this, and it's very, very simple to explain. Walter Gilbert moves into a bedsit. He rents out a room because it's cheap and quiet. He realizes, because he studies quantum physics and he's looking at non-Euclidean geometry as part of his thesis, that the walls, on one of the walls, is this weird angle. And because of these weird angles, things can come back and forward, which then comes out and forces him to do horrible things like almost have sex with her and kill a baby. It's in your mind which of those is worse than the other.
I think we can tell which it wasn't your order as you ordered them.
Yeah.
Put them in a specific order, subconsciously or not.
It was the rotting flesh, man. Plus, I don't like women you have to spit into. And I'm going to cut that out. I'm cutting that out.
Well, so you're going to keep it there. Cool.
Go rest the stuff.
That's probably one of the worst things I've ever said.
Abby must be so proud of you.
No, very rarely. Very, very.
Yeah. I do apologize if my audio goes funny, by the way. My cat has discovered my my microphone wire and is currently having a right go at it. Oi, get off, you.
Any minute now, you're going to get unplugged and taken to the moon.
Yeah. You know what, with this cat, that wouldn't actually surprise me.
It's the antennae that gives.
It's the glowing eyes, you see. It's the eyes that are like pools of mercury. That's what...
So the he believes that the witch will force him to kill the baby. He then breaks through into a room, which might be another dimension, fights the witch, puts his thumbs into her eyes, and then thinks he escapes with the baby after killing the witch. The rat familiar that the witch has then bites the baby in the neck, killing the baby, and then he is sent to a mental institution where Brown Jenkins then gets hold of him and kills him in there.
Isn't that always what happens to the characters in Lovecraft stories? In the vast, vast majority, that's certainly what happens, isn't it? They certainly, almost all of them spend a little time in asylums.
Mm-hmm.
Usually one in particular. Usually it's Arkham Asylum, isn't it? That's where they're all sent.
Always Arkham Asylum.
It doesn't matter where they come from or where they happen to be in the world when they go mad. Isn't there a character in At the Mountains of Madness who actually ends up in Arkham?
Yes.
As also, yeah, and he's in some polar waste in the Antarctic, and he ends up back in Arkham, which by all accounts is not the best place to send people.
No, because it's just full of howling, gibbering people.
It is. It's full of howling, gibbering people, and people who know about the mythos, and people who are consciously or otherwise tend to call or attract creatures from the mythos.
Yeah. I like to think that underneath there's just some kind of giant megaphone that's just pointing to its head.
Maybe. I'm not sure whether he ever talks about it. I'm sure he doesn't, actually. It would surprise me if one of the other writers who were writing in the mythos, like Brian Lumley, ever have. But it would be great if you found out there was something about Arkham.
As long as it's not August Derrilis.
Maybe it's something... Oh, yeah. Now, if you think Lovecraft over-describes, man...
If you want to read Lovecraft, but worse...
but worse. Yeah.
If you want to read almost Anne Rice does Lovecraft, have I got fun for you?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, I have tried reading some of the August Derleth stuff because some of it is relevant, isn't it, to the mythos?
Yes.
But
Until he decides that the old ones are actually evil. And then starts adding God and Satan.
yeah, that's really frustrating because that robs them of horror to me. That really does. They're not, the great old ones are not malevolent in intent. They're just disinterested.
Yes.
We have less relevance to them than, say, domestic chickens do for us.
Yeah.
I think it points that out in At the Mountains of Madness, doesn't it? When they come across the city in the Antarctic that the great old ones built, there's a mosaic which they translate somehow. I love the way Lovecraft never really bothers telling us how they do that. They just translate it. And it talks about how they sort of guided the evolution of humanity as a kind of joke, and then kept us around because they found us kind of amusing and useful.
Yes.
That's it. That's all they found us.
Occasional opposable thumbs are useful. That's really about it.
Especially when all you really have are tendrils.
Yes.
Things with it.
But yeah, so I was saying before about how that's the very simplistic version of the story. Now, if I try and do a plot summary of the actual book, there's so much more in it.
Don't even try.
No, I'm not going to.
Don't even try. Adam's absolutely right. I mean, I reread the short story before coming on air, and it's in typical Lovecraft fashion. It has incredible deviations all over the place. Yes. There are periods where it's talking about the studies, about the back mythology, about where the house comes from, about how it was built, and so on and so forth. This is another thing you get in Lovecraft stories, which makes them very difficult, again, to film. You have time periods. You have, before the main body of narrative occurs, you have entire sections dealing with backstory, which in many instances are actually a little bit longer than the sections dealing with the main narrative.
Yes. Yeah, they often are. I mean, it annoys me that they didn't do stuff like, I'm trying to think how to call it, Azathoth's throne. That is a really hard 2 words to put together. Azathoth's throne. Yeah. Yeah, none of that happens because they remove all of the Lovecraftian, all the names, all the mythos references. And
I imagine, as I said, that's because somebody in sort of studio land was saying people won't understand what that is.
Yes.
People, that will alienate people.
You can get away with it. It's not that hard to do. All you have to do is just have the visual component. You don't have to say, oh, look, it's Azathoth. Ding, ding.
No, I just expect people to understand. Although, to be quite honest, I would be perfectly happy if they did. Then people would probably go out curious and try to find out what Azathoth was and then come to the stories.
That would be lovely. But what really, really infuriates me is the fact that they take the black man out of it.
Yeah, who is a key component, a significant part of the story and a significant part of the horror. Hey. I mean, a lot of the horror comes from that entity, from that character.
Well, I've pulled up a part of it, just because I want to try and get across how much I feel that the story misses the black man. Mm-hmm. So now, don't forget, this is Lovecraft's writing, so this will be really difficult. Gilman is introduced by Mason too, a figure he had never seen before, a tall, lean man of dead black coloration, but without the slightest sign of negroid features. My apologies. Wholly devoid of either hair or beard, and wearing as his only garment a shapeless robe of some heavy black fabric. His feet were indistinguishable because of the table and bench, but he must have been shod, since there was a clicking sound whenever he changed position. The man did not speak, and bore no trace of expression on his small, regular features. Now, you're introduced to him when you're the sign bit, aren't they?
Yes.
That's where you see the black man.
Okay.
So he's the one who gets him to sign the Book of Azathoth.
Yeah, he's sort of like an avatar, isn't he, or a messenger of Azathoth.
Yeah.
Oh, Nyarlathotep, yeah.
So
And it's cool, isn't it? I mean, it's a nice image, and that could have been portrayed so easily.
yes,
Even within the budget, that could have been portrayed easily and made very creepy just by that clicking whenever he moves.
Yes.
That suggests sort of like I don't know, a chitinous shell or something insectile underneath.
Mhm.
It's a very cool image. It could have been so good, and it's not there.
No, it isn't, and that I think is the biggest problem that this has, is because it's so chopped back and so cut down. It lacks so much of what makes the story work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, totally concur. I mean, it's a point I was going to make specifically, but the Lovecraft stories live or die by their atmosphere.
Yes,
They are exercises in atmosphere and very little else, really. I mean, it's what Lovecraft relied on because it's what he was good at as a writer, evoking that sense of cosmic dread and that sense of almost confusion. The stories rely upon it because they do not necessarily have strong, defined characters or even plots as such. A lot of them are more or less plotless. Yes. They're sort of documentary accounts of things. There's a dryness to them. So the atmosphere is all important. And I found the atmosphere of this to be kind of frictionless.
Yeah.
It didn't have the weight or the heft or the oppression that you'd expect from a Lovecraft story.
Yeah. Weightlessness, I think, is how I would describe it. Yeah. It's very floaty. It just, here it begins, here is the middle, and now is the end.
Yeah.
There is no gravity to it.
No, it's very difficult to immerse yourself in it, which you need. There needs to be a sort of syrupy richness to a Lovecraft story. At the Mountains of Madness has it.
Yes.
It really does. There are certain scenes, not At the Mountains of Madness, In the Mouth of Madness, has it, in absolute spades. Absolute spades, even though it's not a direct Lovecraft adaptation. It is a very Lovecraftian story, and it successfully translates all of the elements that make a good Lovecraft story onto the screen, and just drips atmosphere. There are certain sequences in that film where it's almost painful. It's almost painful to sit and watch, but you can't help yourself because the images are so strange, because the dread is escalating to such a significant degree, and you just don't know how bizarre and how horrendous it's going to get. Here, I didn't get any real sense of that. I think part of it is not only due to lack of budget and whatnot, but just due to the way it's shot.
Yeah,
there's a lighting issue.
It's very much America cheapo vision.
Yeah, so is, and very 1990s. All the filters, all the lighting. It feels a bit like an episode of The X-Files, like one of the worst episodes of The X-Files.
I would say it feels more like an episode of like an X-Files knockoff.
Yeah, sort of like.
I'm trying to think of some of them. There were so many.
There was Poltergeist: The Legacy, a bit like that, which was awful.
It's one of the really bad later episodes of The Outer Limits.
Yeah.
Yeah, when that went downhill fast.
Oof, I got cheesy towards the end, didn't it?
Yep. It almost like they gave up somehow.
Gave up and did 2 more series.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Just churned them out.
Is there anything else that you want to bring up, Andy?
No, I maybe like you guys said, the very 90s feel of it, and I kind of agree with that. When they used music, because they used music, very, very poor, cheesy music, in times where there was no need to use it, like when he's marking the papers and it's got this almost happy ditty going on.
Oh, young Gideon technology, gonna make your eyes bleed.
It has no place being there. It's just there to fill a void of no sound, and I assume they needed something to keep the audience engaged. But I think the scene would have probably worked better if there was nothing to it, or just ambient music.
Which sort of suggests that it's filler, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so. A lot of the music is very much that.
But a lot of that music is obviously one old man with a beard and a Casio keyboard.
God, if it was the baby killer downstairs playing a keyboard, that would be great.
I am both German war criminal, baby killer, and Casio keyboard player.
you know what? That would leaven the character a little bit, at least, wouldn't it? Because he is very one note.
But yeah, he does two things: drinks and hits himself on the head with a pipe.
No. We know for a fact that he's a man who does not want to inconvenience people. He does. He puts all of his worldly possessions in boxes and then hangs himself. He could have just been an asshole and let somebody else do that. No.
That's a
he can't.
point. He is very polite in that regard, isn't he? A very polite suicide, a courteous suicide.
I imagine he was very courteous towards the babies he killed as well. Gave them a bath if they pooed themselves. Made sure they were tidy, then girded them, as you do.
Yes. Clean baby, then skin baby.
Oh,
Matty, then skin baby.
yeah, this has gone downhill fast, isn't it? I mean, we're into the baby skinning jokes.
Put some spikes. Then clean baby, then skin baby.
Oh, gross. You were that one.
I think the main thing I really want to be support. Be goes. Now we're into Warner Brothers territory.
It's Acme on baby. Throw baby at wall.
But I think the main thing I took away from this is that it's not really a Lovecraft story anymore. Or not in this adaptation. It misses the fundamentals of what makes a Lovecraft story, which is mainly the atmosphere. It just doesn't have the right feeling or the right sensation about it. It's far too mainstream feeling, far too sedate.
Yes.
And just it lacks. It's very, very lacking for me.
Yeah.
It's like if you order a Coke in a bar and someone gives you dark pepper. You have the same experience, but you're not enjoying it quite as much.
Yeah, it's when you get the crappy house stuff, isn't it? That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's when you order Bacardi and they give you the crappy house white rum.
So what we're saying is, this is Tesco's extra value version of a H.P. Lovecraft story.
That's exact.
This is Blue Label Lovecraft.
Hattie shop Lovecraft. Yeah. It's exactly what it is.
Is there anything else?
And again, I want Guillermo del Toro to do one. I don't care what it is. I just want him to do a Lovecraft story directly. Most of Guillermo del Toro's work has Lovecraft in it somewhere, or references to it. I mean, my God, the end of Hellboy. It is a Shoggoth or something, some elder god, isn't it? It is essentially an elder god. But please, God, please, someone let him do At the Mountains of Madness. Give him an infinite budget and just let him go. Let him do it. Let him make it an 18 certificate. In fact, make it so that it cannot be rated. It's so horrendous, and just let him do it. Let him make the ideal horror film.
It's the dream, isn't it? It really is. It's the thing that I really want to see happen, because I mean, the entire reason that me and Andy started doing this is that both of us feel the same way about the way that modern horror films are made, which is that they are blood, guts and gore, and they are boring.
They're boring, yeah. That is absolutely true. They're boring. For my money, anything that describes itself as a horror film that allows you to get up and walk away and forget it has not done its job.
No.
If you can walk through across the landing after watching this horror film at night without turning the lights on and not feel anything, then it hasn't done its job.
Yep.
I don't want to walk away from something and not feel stirred by it. I want to feel disturbed. I want to feel distressed. I want to feel paranoid and upset by it.
Yeah.
But we're sadly operating in a situation where studios are terrified of doing that.
Yeah, because
absolutely terrified of alienating audiences.
Because everything has to be about the dollar. You're trying to get the maximum amount of dollar. Yeah.
Yes, the widest possible demographic, which is why we have this slew of watered down remakes. It's why there's hardly anything actually in mainstream cinema at the moment that could be described as horror.
No.
Even watered down horror, it's more or less dead unless you look to independent markets.
Yes.
Which is sad. It will change. I have no doubt it will change when it becomes commercially viable again. But to do that, we need this generation's Shining. We need this generation's Exorcist. We need that film. We need this generation's Alien or The Thing. That film that makes it viable again and makes people realize that they enjoy being disturbed, that they actually want to be upset and distressed.
The problem is the last film that did that, I would actually say, they came out of nowhere and made that kind of money, was the original Paranormal Activity.
Probably.
And that first film did Slobber Knockers, and that first film is a solid movie.
Yeah,
it's not bad. Yeah,
it's a decent enough film.
Yes,
I mean, for me, it stands as a testament to just how diluted that horror has become in many respects. Because although it is a decently made film, it's okay. It's nothing really compared to some of the documentary horror you will find on YouTube. Some of the independent documentary horror you will find.
You're talking about Concrete Wasps, aren't you?
Concrete Wasps. Well, it's that. There's others as well.
Get away! Get away! Get away! Get away! No! Bad George.
I don't, not specifically about that. There's others as well.
No,
there's other things as well. But yeah, it's
Concrete Hornet.
Marble Hornets.
Hornets, that's the one. Yeah,
Marble Hornets, fantastic film. Go watch it if you haven't.
No, never again. Never. You want to feel disturbed?
Yeah,
Jesus.
The paranoia, and again, Lovecraft. We've got the influence of Lovecraft there. The operator or the Slender Man is a Lovecraftian entity. He's got the tendrils. He's got the sort of non-Euclidean thing going on. He is such a Lovecraftian entity, and the popularity of him demonstrates just how hungry people are for this, how hungry culture is for it.
But is it that they're hungry for the sort of the next the next disturbed horror film, the next one that affects you deeply, or is it they're hungry for the next horror mascot, the next Freddy Krueger, the next?
Well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, even the ones that start out as something completely distressing and disturbing ultimately end up commodified. I mean, it's happened with Pinhead. It happened to Freddy. The original Nightmare on Elm Street is actually quite frightening.
I would actually go as far as saying that New Nightmare is probably...
that's such a good film.
Oh, yeah. But I would actually classify that as a Lovecraftian movie as well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It totally is. It turns Krueger into a Lovecraftian entity, doesn't it?
Yes.
Ultimately. It's that whole thing of the lines blurring between reality and perception, or reality and dreams, or reality and nightmares in this instance.
Yeah.
Definitely a Lovecraftian film. But this kind of thing is not going to do it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I don't know where it's going to come from. I really don't. At the moment, I cannot see a future point or a situation in which that kind of film will be allowed to be released to a mainstream audience, or will get the marketing that it needs in order to succeed. You need something like that's going to provoke the same reaction as, say, Alien did when it first came out, where you literally had people vomiting in the aisles at the chestburster scene, like The Exorcist, where you had priests and psychologists on standby outside of cinemas. It's very, very difficult to provoke that kind of reaction. In fact, you can't manufacture it. It happens by accident. You can't manufacture that kind of response. So who knows? Who knows where it will come from, or when, or what it will be. But I can tell you this, I have no doubt that there will be some kind of Lovecraftian influence in it somewhere.
Oh, without a doubt. I think we've naturally come to a really good jumping off point. Yeah, I think we really have. So, if nobody's got anything else to bring up, excellent. I think we'll start closing this down. So we'll start. Mr. George, where can people find you if they so wish to find you?
You can find me, you can find my work and my blog at www.strangeplaygrounds.com. There's a blog that's updated regularly there that has at the moment I'm endeavouring to do a free short story per week there, as well as various different bits of ramblings and whatnot. You can also find links to my my published fiction there as well. And you can also find me on the YouTube channel Exaggerated Elegy.
Excellent stuff. And Mr. Millman.
Yes, you can find me on the Moonbase.
I don't have the question yet.
Is a Transformers. What?
Where can people find you?
No. I just wanted to do my. You threw me off. Okay, you can find me on Twitter and Tumblr at CCTFW, on YouTube as Cobra Commander TFW. And you can also find my works and other nonsense on the ccbunker.weebly.com. Anything else, Adam?
I don't know. Is there anything else?
There is. I'm seeing if I'm allowed to say it now.
I think I'd to say whatever you wish. It's a free country.
Yeah. I'm waiting to get complained at. You can also find me on the Moonbase 2 podcast. There is. And you can find that on the Moonbase 2 forums. We have a Facebook page. We're on Twitter and iTunes. And you can also get us on our Libsyn page. And we're also on Patreon if you want to help us out there.
What's the Patreon address?
It is Moonbase. It's Patreon/Moonbase2.
Excellent. Good stuff. And as always, you can find all of the Old Oil House stuff at www.oldoilhouse.co.uk. You can find us on Twitter at The Old Oil House. You can find us on Facebook at The Old Oil House, both group and like page. Join both. It's good for a laugh. You can find us on Tumblr, obviously, at The Old Oil House. You can find us on Instagram at The Old Oil House. And you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/The Old Oil House. Those three words, once again, just in case it hasn't burnt into your brain yet, The Old Oil House. Yes.
What was that place called?
The Old Oil House. .co.uk. www.theoldoilhouse.co.uk. .weebly.com. No, there's no socks. No shirt, no shoes. So, with all that being said, we shall now get out of here. Thank you very much for listening, fellas. It is much appreciated. Once again, without you guys listening, there would be no show. Take care, guys. Say goodnight.